for our first story, we are looking at the Democrats who are trying to get more COVID stimulus passed. So last week, the House of Representatives passed a COVID stimulus package that is now being voted on in the Senate. It is looking like the Senate is probably going to pass it right around, maybe around Thursday, maybe tomorrow or something. They're making a number of adjustments to the package, and then once the Senate votes on it and pass it, which they very likely will pass it because they only have to have 50 votes needed, 51 with Kamala Harris voting, in order to actually be able to get the legislation passed back on over to the House. From there, the House will take another look at it. They'll decide whether or not they agree with the changes that the Senate made, which most people are saying or believe that they will. The House will vote on it, likely pass it again, and then it'll go on up to President Biden. Biden then, of course, will decide whether or not he wants to veto it. It would be very, 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 very surprising if he vetoed it, and he will then sign it into law. So let's go ahead and hop in real quick. Take a look. This is CNBC doing some reporting on this about a day or so ago.
We have some breaking news this morning in Washington that could impact future stimulus measures. Elon Moy joins us with the latest. Elon.
Well, Andrew, the COVID relief package is still winding its way through Congress, but today 10 Democratic senators are going to be laying down a marker for the next stimulus package. They're calling on President Biden to make sure that his massive infrastructure and investment plan includes an extension of unemployment benefits and recurring stimulus payments. And importantly, they want to tie those benefits to broader economic conditions. Now, this idea of automatic stabilizers does have the backing of key committee chairmen, including Bernie Sanders, Ron Wyden, Sherrod Brown, and others. And in a new letter to President Biden, they wrote, "This crisis is far from over, and families deserve certainty that they can put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. Families should not be at the mercy of constantly shifting legislative timelines and ad hoc solutions."
Okay, so Republicans basically have no way of blocking this because it is being done through a process called a budget reconciliation. So this allows for the Democrats to move this legislation through without having to have the 60-vote majority in the Senate that they normally would be required to have in order to be able to pass some sort of bill, some sort of act, getting something signed into law. So that is not to say that the Republicans aren't going to try and stymie or slow down this legislation as much as they possibly can. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin said on Wednesday that he would force the Senate staff to read the full piece of legislation aloud. Like out loud. They're going to read the whole piece of legislation. This could take up to 10 hours. Oh my Lanta. So at this point, the Republicans are just trying to all right, we know that we're not going to be able to stop it, right? But we're going to make this as much of a headache as we possibly can, especially if we know that it would, make a whole bunch of the Democrats mad. It also should not be incredibly surprising that it takes 10 hours to read all the way through a piece of legislation. Oftentimes, these things have so much extra stuff crammed into them. And they can be just thousands and thousands of pages long. And of course, most of the time when they vote on these bills or vote on these pieces of legislation, they'll bring it in and give all the senators 3 hours to read it, right? And there's no way the senators can actually read it in 3 hours. So you end up voting on something you have no idea the extent to which it covers a wide gambit of random different things, right? And that's why I think Ron Johnson is like, no, I'm going to try and force the Democrats' hand to actually read the entire thing. I think that's pretty funny. Will it actually stop it? Of course not. So the legislation is supposed to do a number of things, okay? First, it's supposed to send out a $1,400 direct stimulus check to many Americans, provide $350 billion to state and local governments, fund vaccine distribution, expand the child tax credit, and among a wide variety of other different measures. So there is one thing that I will say, in case you're wondering whether or not you're going to get the stimulus check. Okay, they're changing the income bands for who is going to receive the stimulus check, but they're not changing the income bands for who received the stimulus check before. They're changing when the stimulus check actually gets phased out above the highest income brackets. So the income bands before were $75,000 for someone that is filing as a single person, or $150,000 if you were filing jointly, if you're married filing jointly. So what they're basically doing is they're stepping in and they're being like, well, no, we probably shouldn't just be giving all this money out to people that don't really need it, because that's kind of a bad look. So what we're going to do is we're just going to phase it out much more quickly if you're over $150,000 and you're married filing jointly, or over $75,000 and you're just filing singly. So you will still get the check if you got the check before. Same process goes by. However, if you are making like $175,000 as a married couple, you very likely will not get it. Whereas before, you might have just gotten a stimulus check, just, pared down a whole lot. So the most notable change from the Senate that the Senate actually came through and actually made was specifically around the raising of the minimum wage. So if you guys remember back a really long time ago, like 3 weeks ago or so, I did a whole thing talking about on our podcast the idea and the proposition of the House wanting to put in raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour through this COVID stimulus bill. It went back and forth a whole lot. There were Republicans that were upset about it, saying that they couldn't do it. There were a bunch of Democrats that were saying that this is needed to be done for a really long time. And it went back and forth. Eventually, the House ended up putting in a raising of the $15 minimum wage by the year of 2025 into the COVID stimulus package that was being put together and voted on. The House, of course, then passes that package with the $15 raise in the minimum wage. They kick it over to the Senate, and in the Senate, there is a nonpartisan parliamentarian, is what they're called. And that person basically goes through and reviews some of the specific rules for really more nuanced things within the Senate, and decides whether or not the House or various people in both chambers of Congress are actually abiding by the rules that have been preset for whatever procedure is going on. So in this case, the procedure that's going on is budget reconciliation. There are only specific things that you can actually use reconciliation for. The nonpartisan parliamentarian found that raising the federal minimum wage does actually not comply with reconciliation rules. So the Senate had to go through and to actually take that part of the stimulus package out, much to the dismay of many Democrats, much to the joy of many Republicans. It was within the, like I said, within everything that passed within the House of Representatives. So as a result, this bill is different, and it will have to be kicked back and voted on in the House as a result. So the Democrats, of course, are absolutely thrilled to finally have this moving forward. There are many, many Democrats that have campaigned on before 2020 getting more stimulus passed through Congress. But that was one thing that Biden actually campaigned very, very heavily on, is getting in and one, defeating the coronavirus completely and having it go away. But number two, making sure that Americans got every single dime that they possibly could if they needed it. Okay. Many Democrats have actually been extremely critical of Congress and especially the Biden administration because it has taken so long for something to actually get passed in the way of COVID stimulus. Obviously, nobody's gotten their check so far, and a lot of Democrats are super upset about it. There's nothing that Democrats want more than to be able to get that COVID check sent out to every single person that would be eligible for it. And, I mean, to their defense, this is definitely something that Biden talked a lot about leading up to the election, that this was something that he wanted to get pushed through as soon as he got into office. And, well, it's been 2 months, almost, and still no stimulus checks, still no COVID bill. So one of the reasons, obviously, why Democrats want to be able to get something like this pushed as quickly as possible is because they know these are things that Americans in a lot of ways need, but in really, it's a lot of things that Americans want. Americans love to be able to get a check from the government. Everybody does. That is always how it ends up working out, right? If you ask pretty much anybody in the country if they want to get quote unquote free money from the government, they're going to say yes, right? Of course they do, because they don't necessarily think about the tax consequences and everything that's going to end up happening coming down the pike in 10 or 15 or 20 years as a result of, passing a $2 trillion stimulus package. They're just like, man, it'd be really nice if me and my wife together got $2,800 from the government, right? And so far, there's been a lot of stimulus checks that have been sent out. So there are also a lot of Democrats that are pushing very, very hard for this to not be the last stimulus package. A lot of them want for all of the bills that Biden tries to pass this year to basically be similar in the layout to this. So whether it's his infrastructure bill, whether it's his healthcare bill, all of these things would basically be kind of built upon and around being able to hand out direct payments to citizens in America. Many people are calling for it, and like earlier, actually, you saw in the news clip by CNBC there, many people in Congress right now, and especially senators, are actually pushing for continuous stimulus payments to be handed out, not just as unemployment benefits, but actually to be sending out regular stimulus payments from the government over the next couple of months to help boost the economy and get it back up to just roaring standards, right? At the end of the day, basically saying enough is never enough. So the Republicans are obviously incredibly angry about this, but they realize there's not a whole lot that they can do about it. Not only are they not able to stop it, but by opposing the legislation that will give a bunch of Americans, like I said, quote unquote, free money from the government, it's kind of a bad look, right? Republicans are seen as the ones right now standing up in Congress and saying, no, I don't think it's a responsible thing to be handing out all of these payments and all of this money to people that may or may not actually need it. The government should probably keep this money and invest it back into a lot of other things. Much of the Republican argument is basically this. It appears like by a lot of economic measures, the economy seems to be growing again. Although it may be slight, does look like things are kind of getting boosted back up. And, we know, secondly, that their vaccine distribution is going through the roof. We're getting all these different vaccine strains that are coming out, or different vaccines made by different companies, whether it's Johnson & Johnson or Moderna or BioNTech and Pfizer. We've got these different vaccines. We're getting them out and we're getting them into the arms of the people, and we're going to reach herd immunity, whatever that looks like, eventually. And when that happens, the economy is just going to be booming again, okay? And as a result, we don't need all of this stimulus, right? We don't need these stimulus payments. The economy is coming back in the way that it should. The reason why you're handing out money from the government is, of course, to be able to spur on economic growth. So at the end of all of it, honestly, I think that much of this COVID stimulus that's being handed out is very, very much for political gains. It just looks very good if you're the senator or you're the representative that signs into legislation through whatever ways that you possibly can to be able to get people money into their pockets. There are absolutely people in this country that need it. I've said it before, I will say it again. Of course, there are people that are struggling right now and that need this money in their pockets. However, the data shows that those people are actually, that group of people is significantly smaller than a lot of politicians would like for you to think that it is. This coronavirus pandemic has primarily hit low wage and low income earners the hardest, which sucks because those are the people that you would hope that it wouldn't hit the hardest. But it has. It has absolutely destroyed the pocketbooks of a lot of people that were living paycheck to paycheck, that were renting out homes. It hasn't severely affected people that own homes so far. We're not seeing a gigantic mortgage crisis that you would normally see during a recession where people are unable to pay their bills because they lose their jobs. When it comes down to it, the labor market did tighten a fair amount. However, it does look like the labor market is coming back. Unemployment is slowly but surely coming back down, and the jobless claims are coming down as well. I think personally, and granted, I'm not in Washington, I'm just a humble political pundit over here, but the best thing that this money could be spent on is updating the systems in which we figure out how people actually are doing if there's an economic recession. There are plenty of different ways that we could update systems in place where we would be able to figure out whether or not people actually have been incredibly negatively affected by the coronavirus pandemic. We currently are using 2019 tax returns in order to be able to decide who is going to get the COVID stimulus. That's a terrible metric to use to send anything out to people. There are plenty of people in 2020 that actually lost their jobs through the pandemic, but were, making gangbusters money in 2019, and now they don't have any money, right? Plenty of situations like that are happening all across the country, and the government doesn't know who to send this money to. I think one of the best ways is obviously to give it out through unemployment, but most of the money that there's putting a lot of this into is unfortunately going to large corporations. That's happening a ton. And it's going out in the form of stimulus payments, right? Stimulus checks. When it all comes down to it, the buck will have to stop eventually, okay? The government cannot continue to just pay out and pay out and pay out and pay out money. There will have to come a point in time where the United States looks at itself and it's like, all right, we're completely overspent. We don't have a dime left. It's probably not going to happen anytime soon. And unfortunately, it's going to end up pushing us further and further into debt, especially after we had the past 4 years of Trump, where he lowered the taxes and then obviously significantly lowered the revenue that the government was taking in, but didn't take away hardly any of the spending. If anything, spending went up. So now we're going into a further hole, which is definitely not what we need.